The man's voice was like gravel. "This ain't for ladies." He stood in front of the registration table, blocking the way. He was big, with a stained cowboy hat and a shiny belt buckle the size of a dinner plate. He looked at Sarah like she was a stray dog that had wandered into the wrong yard. When she didn't move, he smirked. "Are you lost, little lady? The pie baking contest is on the other side of the fairgrounds." The scene was the Dust Devil Arena, a ring of rusted metal and splintered wood in the heart of Texas. The air smelled of dirt, sweat, and stale beer. This was the sign-up for the main event, the jackpot bull ride. The winner would take home $10,000 and bragging rights for a year. The man blocking her path was Jed, the reigning champion. He wasn't just a rider, he was a local legend who thought he owned the place. Sarah met his gaze. Her voice was steady and low. "I'm here to sign up." Jed threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, ugly sound. His buddies standing behind him laughed too. "Hear that, boys? She wants to ride." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a condescending whisper. "Listen, sweetheart, you're gonna get hurt. These are one-ton beasts, not ponies at a petting zoo. Go home before you break a nail. This is the kind of injustice that can make your blood boil." If you believe that courage doesn't have a gender, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. And tell us what city you're watching from and post the word justice in the comments below. The problem wasn't just Jed. It was the man behind the registration table who now refused to look at her. It was the other cowboys in line who were either snickering or staring at the ground, too cowardly to speak up. The system was against her. Jed was just its loud, arrogant voice. The man at the table finally mumbled, "Sorry, ma'am, there are liability concerns." It was a weak excuse. The real reason was standing right in front of her. But Jed and the others missed something. They saw a woman they thought was out of her element. They didn't see the look in her eyes. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger. It was a cold, hard focus. As Jed postured, her gaze drifted past him to the pens where the bulls were kept. She scanned the massive animals, not with the shock of a newcomer, but with the calculated assessment of a professional. There was a story behind that stare, a past she had kept buried for years. Jed thought he had won. He gestured dismissively with his thumb. "Go on now, scram." Sarah ignored him completely. She reached into her back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. She didn't take out an ID. Instead, she slapped a thick stack of cash onto the table. The bills were held together by a simple rubber band. "That's the $500 entry fee," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. The crowd around them went quiet. "And that," she added, pushing another, even thicker stack of cash forward, "is $10,000 for any man here who thinks he can ride longer than I can." The silence was absolute. Jed's smirk vanished. Was this woman insane? Or was she about to expose a truth this town wasn't ready to face? The $10,000 sat on the table, a silent challenge that sucked all the air out of the immediate area. The man behind the registration desk, a weedy guy named Hank, looked from the money to Jed, then back to Sarah. His face was pale. He had never seen this much cash outside of a bank. More importantly, he had never seen anyone, man or woman, stand up to Jed like this. Jed was the first to recover. He let out a short, sharp laugh, but it sounded forced. "You got a lot of nerve, I'll give you that. But that money doesn't buy you a spot. This is a professional competition. I have my Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association card right here," Sarah said, pulling a laminated ID from her wallet and placing it next to the cash. "It's valid." Hank, the registration clerk, nervously picked up the card. His hands trembled slightly. The ID looked legitimate. The name read Sarah Collins. The photo matched. He looked at the PRCA logo, then back at Jed, his eyes pleading for guidance. This was above his pay grade. Jed's face hardened. The amusement was gone, replaced by pure resentment. He couldn't attack her credentials, so he attacked her character. "Where'd you get that? Steal it from your daddy? I know every rider worth his salt in this state, and I've never heard of a Sarah Collins." "Maybe you only pay attention to the men," she replied without missing a beat. This exchange was no longer just a small-town spat. It was becoming a public spectacle. People were drifting over from the food stalls and merchandise tents, drawn by the palpable tension. They whispered among themselves, phones starting to emerge to record the confrontation. Sarah wasn't just challenging a man, she was challenging an institution. The culture of the rodeo was built on a specific image of rugged masculinity, a history that stretched back over a century in this part of the country. A woman entering the most dangerous event wasn't just unusual. It was seen as an affront to that tradition. An older man with a clipboard and a staff shirt pushed his way through the growing crowd. He was the arena manager, a man named Dale. "What's the hold-up here, Jed?" "We're on a schedule." Jed pointed a thumb at Sarah. "This little thing thinks she's a bull rider. She's trying to cause a scene." Dale looked at Sarah, then at the PRCA card and the mountain of cash on the table. He was a businessman, and the sight of that money plus the attention she was drawing made gears turn in his head. A controversy could be bad for business, but a spectacle sold tickets. "Is your card legit, miss?" Dale asked, his tone more serious than Jed's. "It is," Sarah said, "and my money is real. I'm paying the entry fee and posting a side bet. It's all within the rules." Dale was caught. Legally and technically, she had every right to register, but letting her ride would mean alienating Jed, his star attraction, and a significant portion of the traditionalist audience. He could hear the grumbling from some of the other cowboys. "This is a joke," one of them muttered. "She's gonna get herself killed." Another added, "And she'll ruin the sport's reputation." Their motivations were a mix of genuine but misplaced concern and pure unadulterated pride. They didn't want to be shown up by a woman in their own arena. Dale rubbed the back of his neck, thinking. Jed saw his hesitation and pressed his advantage. "Let her ride, Dale, but when she gets carted out of here on a stretcher, it's on you, and I want her signing a waiver that says she can't sue any of us when she lands in a hospital." This was the out Dale needed. "All right," he declared to Sarah. "You want to ride, you can ride, but you sign a comprehensive liability waiver. You assume all risk, no ambulance chasing if you get a scratch. You understand?" "I understand," Sarah said, her expression unreadable. "Give me the pen." The waiver was a thick packet of paper. It was filled with dense legal jargon designed to intimidate. Words like catastrophic injury, permanent disability, and death were repeated on every page. Dale handed it to Sarah with a grim finality, as if handing her a death sentence. Jed stood nearby, arms crossed, a smug look returning to his face. He believed she would read the terrifying clauses and finally back down. He thought this was her last chance to walk away with her dignity intact. He was wrong. Sarah didn't even skim it. She flipped directly to the last page and signed her name, her signature a clean, decisive stroke. She pushed the papers and the money back toward Hank. All set. Now what's my draw? The draw was the process of randomly assigning a bull to a rider. Hank, now acting purely on Dale's authority, fumbled with a velvet bag full of numbered chips. His hand was still shaking as he held it out to her. The other cowboys watched in stunned silence. This was really happening. Sarah reached into the bag and pulled out a small wooden chip. She glanced at it, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. It was almost imperceptible, a slight tightening of her jaw. She held up the chip. On it was burned the number 13. A wave of murmurs went through the crowd of riders. Jed's smirk froze and then fell from his face entirely. He took a step forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. "No, no way, put it back, draw again." Dale snatched the chip from Sarah's hand. 13. "Are you sure?" He stared at the number as if it were a venomous snake. So of all the bulls in the pen, number 13 was the one no one wanted. He didn't have a fancy name like Tornado or Bone Crusher. He was just called Blackwater. He was a massive, jet-black animal with a quiet and terrifying intelligence. He wasn't the wildest jumper, but he was brutally effective. He had a spin move so fast and violent that it had sent every single rider who had ever drawn him to the dirt in under 4 seconds. He had ended careers, broken bones, and was responsible for more hospital visits than any other 2 bulls in the circuit combined. Riding Blackwater wasn't about winning, it was about surviving. "The draw is the draw," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension. "I drew 13, I ride Blackwater." As she spoke those words, the reason for her being here began to crystallize. This wasn't a random act of feminist defiance. This wasn't just about putting an arrogant cowboy in his place. This was personal. The cold focus in her eyes, her lack of fear, her knowledge of the rules, it all started to connect. This world wasn't new to her. She had been running from it. 15 years ago, her father, a legendary bull rider himself, had drawn that same bull in this very arena. Blackwater was younger then, but just as vicious. Her father had lasted 7 seconds, a heroic effort, but he was thrown on the 8th. He landed wrong. The bull did the rest. Sarah had been a child, watching from the stands. She saw everything. The official cause of death was catastrophic internal injuries. Sarah just called it Blackwater. After that day, her family fell apart. Her mother moved them away, forbidding any mention of rodeos or bull riding ever again. Sarah had tried to forget. She went to college, got a degree, and built a life as far away from the dust and the danger as she could. But the memory of that day was a ghost that never left her. When she heard that Blackwater was still active, still undefeated, still hurting people in the same arena that took her father, a dormant part of her woke up. This wasn't about money or glory. It was about closing a circle. It was about facing the monster that had haunted her family for a decade and a half. Jed didn't know any of this. All he saw was a woman who had, by some impossible stroke of luck, drawn the most dangerous bull. He saw it as a suicide mission. "You're crazy," he finally said, his voice a low growl. "That bull is going to kill you." Sarah looked him dead in the eye. "Then you've got nothing to worry about, do you?" She turned and walked toward the chutes, leaving Jed, Dale, and the stunned crowd behind. The weight of her past was heavy on her shoulders, but for the first time in 15 years, she was walking toward the fight instead of away from it. Walking away from the registration table felt like walking through water. The noise of the arena faded into a dull hum in Sarah's ears. She was heading for the chutes, the small narrow pens where riders get onto the bulls. It's a dangerous place, a backstage area of raw metal, dirt, and nervous energy. She needed to prepare, and she didn't have much time. The other cowboys parted as she approached. The snickering had stopped completely. Their faces now held a new expression, a tense, uneasy mix of shock and morbid curiosity. They were all waiting to see a train wreck. As she found an open spot on a wooden bench to prepare her gear, a figure emerged from the shadows. He was older, with a limp and a face like a worn leather map. "You're Frank Collins' girl, ain't you?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it cut through Sarah's intense focus. She looked up. She didn't recognize him at first. "I am." "I thought so," the man said, nodding slowly. He was Cody, a retired rider who had known her father well. He'd been in the arena the day Frank died. "I saw it in your eyes. That's the same look your daddy got when he was locked in on a beast. What are you doing, kid? This ain't just any bull, that's Blackwater." "That's why I'm here," Sarah said, her voice flat. Cody didn't need any more explanation. He understood. This wasn't about money or fame. It was a haunting. Meanwhile, Jed was processing the situation. The revelation that Sarah had drawn Blackwater had rattled him. He remembered Frank Collins. He was just a rookie back then, and he remembered the hush that fell over the crowd that day. He remembered the sound the impact made. A part of him, a small, buried part, felt a sliver of fear for her. But his pride was too loud. He couldn't back down now, not in front of everyone. He stormed back to the registration table where Dale, the manager, was still staring at the cash. "Fine," Jed announced to the crowd that was now hanging on every word. "I'm taking that bet. $10,000 says she doesn't even make it out of the gate. Easiest money I'll ever make." The announcer's voice suddenly boomed over the PA system, interrupting him. "All right, folks, settle down. We've got a last-minute addition to the roster that you won't believe. Coming up next in chute number 3, give a big Texas welcome to Sarah Collins, who has drawn the unrideable legend himself, Blackwater." The clock was now officially ticking. Sarah ignored the announcement and focused on her ritual. She pulled on her riding glove, the leather worn and familiar. She began wrapping the bull rope around her hand, her movements precise and automatic. This was muscle memory, drilled into her for years before being locked away. Cody watched her. "Your father was working on a new technique for spinners like him," he said softly. "He said you couldn't fight their power. You had to join it. He never got to perfect it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small worn leather rosary. He always had this with him. "You should have it." Sarah looked at the rosary, then back at Cody. She took it and tucked it securely inside her vest. It was a physical link to the man she was here to avenge. The world shrank to the width of the steel chute. Sarah lowered herself onto Blackwater's broad back. The animal was unnervingly calm, a mountain of muscle and contained fury. She could feel the immense power radiating beneath her, the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. The chute boss leaned in, his voice a professional monotone in her ear. "You ready, rider? Just nod." The arena had gone quiet. Not just quiet, but dead silent. The thousands of people watching held their breath. They knew this bull. They knew his reputation. Jed stood by the fence, his arms crossed, a tense, expectant look on his face. He was waiting for the inevitable violent explosion. He was waiting for the spin. Sarah took a deep breath, adjusted her grip on the rope one last time and gave a sharp nod. The gate swung open with a loud clang. What happened next was not what anyone expected. For the first second, Blackwater did nothing. He took a single step out into the arena as if assessing the situation. Then he exploded. Just as the legend said, he lowered his left shoulder and began his signature move. A spin so fast it was meant to generate enough centrifugal force to tear any rider from his back. Jed smirked. Here it comes. This was the moment of failure, but Sarah did something impossible. Instead of leaning away from the spin, fighting against the force, she leaned into it. She shifted her weight, not against the bull's momentum, but with it. For a split second, it looked like she was about to be thrown off even faster, but then it happened. By joining the spin, she found the eye of the hurricane, the single point of stillness at the center of the chaos. She used the bull's own savage power to anchor herself to his back. Jed's smirk vanished. His jaw went slack. He recognized the theory behind the move. It was Frank Collins's ghost, right there in the arena. He realized she wasn't just Frank's daughter, she was his prodigy. The girl who had disappeared 15 years ago hadn't just been mourning, she had been remembering. The digital clock in the arena lit up. 1, 2. Blackwater, feeling the rider was still there, transitioned from the spin into a series of brutal, bone-jarring bucks. The crowd gasped. 3, 4. She passed the 4-second mark, the point where every other rider had failed. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the stands. 5, 6. She was still on, moving in perfect sync with the animal, as if they were two parts of a single being. The murmur turned into a roar. The sound grew with every second she held on. 7, 8. The arena horn blared, the signal for a qualifying ride. She had done it. She had officially ridden Blackwater, but she didn't let go. The crowd's roar faltered for a second, replaced by confusion. The ride was over. The score was on the board. The bullfighters were moving in, ready to do their job. But Sarah was still on the bull. Her eyes were wide open, locked in a state of pure, undiluted focus. This was no longer about the rules, the score, or the competition. This was between her, the bull, and the memory of her father. 9. She was dominating the beast now, her body predicting his every move. 10. Jed was just staring, his face pale. This wasn't a ride, it was a statement. 11. Finally, on her own terms, she loosened her grip. Her mission was complete. With a final, powerful buck, Blackwater threw her clear, but Sarah was ready. She twisted her body in mid-air and landed on her feet with the practiced grace of a gymnast. It was a perfect dismount, a final act of defiance that left no doubt about her skill. The bullfighter clowns, dressed in their bright costumes, rushed forward to distract the enraged animal, drawing him away from the lone figure in the center of the arena. Sarah didn't run for the fence. She stood her ground for a long moment, her chest heaving, and simply watched the bull that had haunted her for 15 years. Then, with a calm authority that captivated everyone, she turned and walked away. The reaction was instantaneous. The crowd's stunned silence erupted into a single deafening roar. It was a sound of pure pandemonium, a wave of noise that shook the cheap metal stands of the Dust Devil Arena. They were no longer cheering for a score, they were cheering for a legend. Every phone that had been raised to film a tragedy was now recording a triumph. Jed was a statue by the fence. He was invisible, swallowed by the crowd's adoration for Sarah. His $10,000 bet was forgotten. His championship status was an afterthought. His entire identity, built on being the toughest man in the toughest sport, had been dismantled in 11 seconds by the very person he had dismissed. People he knew, his own friends, were now slapping him on the back, not in congratulations, but in open mockery. He had lost everything, the money, the respect, his place at the top, without her ever having to say a word to him. As Sarah reached the safety of the chutes, Cody was there waiting. His tough, weathered face was streaked with tears. "Your father," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He would be so damn proud of you, kid." He pressed a cold bottle of water into her hand, a simple gesture that grounded her in the dizzying reality. Before she could even take a sip, Dale, the arena manager, came running up, his face flushed with excitement and opportunism. That was the greatest ride I have ever seen, he gushed. Incredible. We have to talk. A contract, a multi-arena tour, endorsements. You're the new face of this sport. We can make millions. Sarah looked at his excited face, then past him to where Jed was being swallowed by the crowd. She felt nothing. The fire of revenge that had driven her for so long had burned itself out. There was only a quiet, hollow emptiness left in its place. She had proven her point. Jed was irrelevant. Dale's offers of fame were meaningless. She pushed the water bottle back into Cody's hand, walked right past Dale without a word, and found a quiet, dark corner behind the bleachers. Leaning her head against the cool metal, she closed her eyes. The roar of the crowd was a distant echo. Here, in the darkness, she finally let it all go. The adrenaline, the grief, the pressure of 15 years, it all came crashing down. And for the first time since she was a little girl, she cried. It was a cry not of sadness, but of release. The wave of emotion passed, leaving behind a profound sense of peace. Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. The ghost was gone. She had faced the monster, and now, in the quiet aftermath, she had to decide what to do with her freedom. Dale found her a few minutes later, still clutching a pen and a blank contract. There you are. Look, I know that was a lot to take in, but an opportunity like this won't wait. You have a gift, a real gift. You could be the next champion. You could change the whole sport. His words presented her with a new challenge, one she hadn't anticipated. The path forward was forking. One way led back into the arena, to a life of fame, money, and constant battle. The other led away. She had come here to end a story, but Dale was offering her a whole new book. Was this who she was now? A bull rider. The world deserves to see what you can do, Dale pressed. They just did, Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. Her journey of revenge had been a destination, not a career path. She realized that overcoming her past didn't mean she had to live in it. The growth was in understanding the difference. Cody found them, shooing Dale away with a wave of his hand. "Leave the kid be," he said. He sat down on a hay bale next to Sarah. "He's not wrong, you know," Cody said gently. "You have a gift, one your father gave you. You don't have to use it in this circus, but don't you dare bury it again. What you did today, it wasn't about beating a bull, it was about showing you weren't broken." His words helped her see clearly. The final piece of her journey fell into place. Just then, a figure shuffled toward them, head down. It was Jed. He looked smaller, stripped of his arrogance. He didn't look at her. He just held out a thick white envelope. "The 10,000, he mumbled, his voice raspy. "From the bet. I never seen anything like that ride." This was the moment she could have savored her victory. She could have taken the money, a final symbol of his defeat. But the person who had walked into the arena that afternoon was not the same person standing here now. She looked at the envelope, then at Jed's defeated posture. Punishing him further felt pointless. She gently pushed the envelope back toward him. "Keep it," she said. Her voice was devoid of malice. "Or better yet, donate it to the Rider Relief Fund. It can help the next guy Blackwater throws." Jed looked up, shocked. He saw no gloating in her eyes, no triumph. He only saw a calm strength that was more intimidating than any anger. He nodded slowly, speechless, and backed away. The transformation was complete. The cold, hard focus in Sarah's eyes had been replaced by a quiet confidence. The weight was gone. She stood up, gave Cody a grateful nod, and picked up the simple duffel bag that held her gear. She walked toward the parking lot, not looking back at the lights of the arena or the sound of the crowd. She was leaving it all behind. The noise, the offers, the money, and the past. She had overcome the bull. She had overcome the prejudice, and most importantly, she had overcome the ghost that had defined her. She was finally, completely free. Sarah's ride on Blackwater wasn't just news, it was a phenomenon. Videos of the 11-second battle went viral, racking up millions of views on YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook. News outlets from ESPN to local Texas stations ran the story. Mystery woman humiliates rodeo champion on unrideable bull. Sarah Collins became a household name overnight. But while the world was celebrating her, Sarah herself had disappeared. She wasn't answering calls. She wasn't giving interviews. She had returned to the quiet, anonymous life she had before. This silence created a vacuum, and Dale, the arena manager, was happy to fill it. He was furious that his newfound cash cow had just walked off the farm. In a series of televised interviews, he tried to seize control of the narrative. It was an amazing ride, a once-in-a-lifetime fluke, he'd say. But Ms. Collins is clearly an unstable individual. She refused to sign any professional contracts. She shows no respect for the sport. He announced a new high-stakes event, the Texas Bull Riding Invitational, with a $100,000 grand prize. He publicly challenged Sarah to appear and defend her unofficial title. The pressure began to mount. Reporters found the small town where she was living, camping outside her house. The world wanted another show. Jed, meanwhile, was living in a personal hell. His public humiliation was absolute. He couldn't go to a bar or a diner without hearing whispers or seeing people watching the video on their phones. His sponsors dropped him. His friends mocked him. His entire identity was gone. Fueled by bitterness and Dale's encouragement, he decided to fight back not in the arena but in the court of public opinion. He started a smear campaign. It began with subtle hints in an interview. "You know, nobody just wakes up and rides like that," Jed said to a sympathetic journalist. "Especially not on a bull like Blackwater. You have to wonder what kind of advantages she might have had. It runs in the family." The insinuation was clear. He escalated it over the next few days. He began to openly question the legacy of Sarah's father, Frank Collins. "People around back then knew," Jed lied. "Frank was reckless. He cut corners. People said he modified his gear, that he was juicing. He took risks that no honest rider would take." This was the new attack, a venomous assault designed to poison the one thing Sarah had left, her father's memory. It was a desperate, cowardly act, but it was effective. The narrative began to shift. Was Sarah's ride a tribute to a hero, or the continuation of a legacy of cheating? Cody did his best to defend her, telling anyone who would listen to leave her alone. "This was never about fame for her," he told a reporter. "It was personal. It was about her father. And Frank Collins was the straightest arrow I ever knew." The rumors eventually reached Sarah. She saw Jed on a morning news show, his face full of false sincerity as he cast doubt on her father's honor. The peace she had felt after the ride began to curdle into a cold, focused anger. This was no longer about a bull. It was no longer about her. Jed had crossed a sacred line. Her period of overcoming was over. She had walked away from the fight, but the fight had followed her home. Her phone rang. It was Cody. "Don't listen to that trash, kid. It's just the sound of a desperate man." "I know," Sarah said, her voice dangerously calm. "I'm coming back, Cody. But I'm not coming back to ride. I'm coming back to finish this." Her decision was made. The climax was no longer about her against a bull. It was about the truth against a lie. The night of the Texas Bull Riding Invitational was a media circus. The Dust Devil Arena was packed to capacity, with more satellite news vans in the parking lot than pickup trucks. Dale had hyped the event to a frenzy, framing it as the ultimate showdown. He had a massive championship belt ready. The main event was Jed riding the top-ranked bull, but the real question on everyone's lips was, will Sarah show up? Dale didn't think she would, and that was part of his plan. When she failed to appear, he would declare Jed the champion by default and brand Sarah a coward. The final rides of the night concluded. The announcer's voice echoed through the arena. "And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. The winner of the inaugural Texas Invitational by acclamation, Mr. Jed." Jed walked into the center of the arena, trying to look triumphant, but his swagger was gone. He looked nervous. As Dale held up the garish championship belt, a side gate opened. A single figure walked out. It was Sarah. A wave of sound washed over the arena. She wasn't wearing riding gear. She had on simple jeans, boots, and a plain jacket. She ignored Dale and Jed and walked directly to the announcer, who, stunned, handed her his microphone. The arena fell silent again. "Good evening," Sarah said, her voice steady and clear, echoing in the vast space. "I was challenged to come here tonight to defend a title, but I'm not here to ride. I'm here to talk about a legacy." She turned her gaze on Jed, who stood frozen a few feet away. "You've heard a lot of rumors lately. Jed here has told the world that my father, Frank Collins, was a cheat. He says my father's legacy is a lie." Jed puffed out his chest. "It's the truth. Everyone knew it." "No," Sarah said. "I'm here to tell you the truth." The tension was unbearable. "My father was not a cheat. He was a good man who was the victim of a crime, and I have proof." On cue, another figure walked out from the same side gate. It was Cody. He was carrying a dusty old lockbox. He walked to Sarah's side and placed it on the ground. "This box contains my father's effects from his last ride," Sarah announced. "His gear, his wallet, and a letter. A letter that was given to Cody for safekeeping years ago, with instructions not to reveal it unless my father's name was ever publicly disgraced." She reached into the box and pulled out a yellowed, sealed envelope. "This letter is a confession," she said, her voice ringing with power, "but it wasn't written by my father." She opened it and began to read. The letter was from 20 years ago. The words were shaky, filled with guilt. It was a confession from a former arena official, a man who admitted to taking a bribe from a rival stock contractor to tamper with Frank Collins's bull rope before his final ride. The official had sliced it partway through, weakening it, never imagining Frank would draw a bull as violent as Blackwater. The letter was a pathetic plea for forgiveness from a man who had lived with the guilt of his actions for years. Sarah let the letter drop to her side. She looked at Jed, her eyes locking onto his. The man who took the bribe, the man who tampered with the rope, the man who was responsible for my father's death, was your father. A collective gasp went through the arena. Jed's face went from pale to ashen. He stared at her, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. "It's a lie," he finally choked out. "She's making it up." "Am I?" Sarah said calmly. "Cody was Frank's best friend. He suspected something was wrong that day. After your father died last year, Cody visited your mother. He asked her if your father had ever mentioned that day. Your mother, a good woman torn apart by her husband's secret, gave him this." Cody stepped forward and held up a second document, a signed notarized affidavit from Jed's own mother, confirming the confession is real. She wanted the truth to be buried, but she couldn't let Frank's name be dishonored. It was over. Jed's entire world, his family's name, his own identity built on a lie, was utterly destroyed in front of thousands of people and a live television audience. He didn't just lose an argument, he lost his past, present, and future. He stumbled backward, his face a mask of horror, before turning and practically running from the arena in shame. The climax wasn't a physical battle, it was the devastating, clean-cut victory of truth. With Jed gone, a stunned silence held the arena captive. Dale stood holding the worthless championship belt, his entire spectacle having crumbled into a public reckoning. The quiet was broken not by a roar, but by a slow, rising tide of applause. It was a sound of deep respect, an acknowledgement of the profound justice they had just witnessed. The conclusion to every character's arc was now written in stone. Jed's story ended in disgrace, a tragic but fitting end for a man whose arrogance was built upon a hidden family sin. Dale's career as a promoter was likely over, his reputation ruined. Cody had finally fulfilled his decades-long duty to his friend, bringing the truth to light and giving Frank Collins his honor back. And Sarah's arc was complete. She had not only faced her personal demon in Blackwater, but she had now vanquished the lies that had shadowed her family's name. She was no longer just the girl whose father had died in the ring. She was the woman who had brought the truth home. She didn't stay to soak in the applause, that was never her goal. She handed the microphone back to the shell-shocked announcer, found Cody, and together they walked toward the exit, leaving the chaos behind. As they stepped out into the cool night air, Sarah took one last look back at the brightly lit sign that read, Dust Devil Arena. It no longer held any power over her. There was no pain, no anger, no sadness. There was only finality. She got into Cody's old pickup truck, and as they drove away, she didn't look back. She was leaving the rodeo world for good this time, not as someone running from the past, but as someone who had finally conquered it. Her victory wasn't the $100,000 prize or a shiny belt. It was the quiet, unshakable peace that settled over her as the lights of the arena faded in the rearview mirror. She hadn't just won a fight, she had won back her life. The conclusion wasn't loud or explosive, it was the satisfyingly quiet click of a chapter closing for good, a chapter of pain that gave way to a future she could now write entirely on her own terms. 1 year later. The air here doesn't smell of dust and beer, but of fresh hay and clean earth. Sarah stands in the middle of a sprawling green pasture, watching a dozen rescued horses graze peacefully. After leaving the rodeo world behind, she had used the money from a trust her father had left her to buy this land, turning it into a sanctuary for animals that had been abused or abandoned. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, nervously sits atop a gentle old mare. "I'm scared I'm going to fall," the girl says. Sarah smiles, a genuine, easy smile that reaches her eyes. "Falling is part of it," she says, her voice kind. "The important thing is getting back on, not for anyone else, just for you." Later that evening, inside her small, simple house, a news report flickers on the television in the corner. The story is about the Rider Relief Fund, which has seen a massive surge in donations, allowing it to expand its coverage for injured athletes. They mention its largest benefactor is an anonymous donor from West Texas. The report notes the positive changes in rodeo safety protocols, many inspired by the Frank Collins Integrity Act. The old Dust Devil Arena has been sold, demolished, and is being rebuilt as a community sports complex. Sarah watches for a moment, a flicker of distant memory in her eyes. She feels no connection to that world anymore, but she sees the positive ripples her actions sent through it. She takes a sip of her tea, then turns the television off, cutting the past away with a simple click. She steps outside onto her porch, listening to the quiet sounds of her new life. She is at peace, her past finally laid to rest, her future as open and wide as the Texas sky above her. Sarah's powerful journey shows us that the biggest battles are often for things we can't see: honor, truth, and peace. Her story proves that true strength isn't always about being the loudest in the room, but about having the courage to stand for what's right, even when you have to stand alone. What did her final act of revealing the truth mean to you? Was it the perfect form of justice? We want to hear your reflections on her incredible story in the comments below. If you watched this entire journey of redemption and truth, show your support by commenting with the phrase, "I watched until the end." Your engagement helps us bring more powerful stories like this to you, and if you were moved by Sarah's fight for justice, then you will be absolutely captivated by the story of a waitress who uncovered a city-wide conspiracy. That video is on your screen right now. Click to watch it next, and thank you for being with us.